a little bit. Oh yes, and I want to let you know we are recording. Thanks, Liz. So how this will work is we will just start by having the panelists introduce themselves and tell us, where they studied, what their recent hire looks like, and how long they've been in their new position. And then after introductions, we will just really just open it up for Q&A. We want it to be, relatively informal so that you all have the opportunity to ask all of the burning questions that you're dying to ask. And Liz and I have some questions ourselves if we need to use those, but I think we will go ahead and get started, and I'll just go by how I see you guys on my screen. So Theresa, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Theresa Gildner. In terms of training, I got my PhD at the University of Oregon, working on the Schwarr Health and Life History Project, and Josh Snodgrass was my advisor. I then did a postdoc at Dartmouth College, working with Dr. Zane Thayer, and now I am as assistant professor at WashU in St. Louis. So I started in halfway through the year. It's kind of a weird setup, but I did start in January 2020, but this is my first semester teaching and being more on campus. So it's nice to be here. It's nice to see you all.
Thank you so much. Kyle, would you like to go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle Wiley. I am currently going out of order. I did my PhD at Yale University working with Catherine Pangerbrick. And I did my dissertation research kind of in collaboration with a group at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at UCLA working with Molly Fox, funded through an NIH F32 and an NRSA award.
Great,
oh, and this is the second, I just started my second year. Sorry about that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Andrew, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Andy. I did my PhD at Northwestern studying biological anthropology and did my dissertation research at the Developmental Pathways for Health Research Unit at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, which is where I'm currently situated now. I graduated in 2020 and started a remote postdoc out of Mass Gen Hospital and Harvard Medical School in Boston, but have been here since I started the postdoc, and I'll be starting as an assistant professor at UC Berkeley in the anthropology department in January.
Great, thank you so much. Jennifer.
Hey everyone, so I'm Jennifer Cullin. I kind of did my PhD work at two different universities. So I started out at UC Riverside working with Dr. Robin Nelson, but she transferred to an undergraduate college. And so I ended up transferring and I went to Indiana University to work with Andrea Wiley, where I just finished up my PhD. I think my degree date is July 30th. And then I started my first academic position on August 1st, so 2 days later. And so I'm currently a visiting assistant professor at Indiana University, but I switched departments. So I'm in the human biology program teaching there, and I'm currently on the job market. So full of advice, but I'm excited to hear other people's advice on this panel too.
Awesome, thanks, Jen. So I think now we will open it up and let you guys sort of guide the Q&A. If nobody has any questions to start, I can throw out a question, but if you do have questions, you can either raise your hand or you can just post it in the chat, whichever you're more comfortable with. So why don't, just to get us started, I think one of the big questions we all have is how the job market has changed in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic, and what are your experiences? If you had experience before the pandemic and you could compare and contrast, that would be great. If not, just what were your experiences like during this recent job seeking?
Yeah, so it was a lot different. I was on the job market the year before COVID and then the year COVID started. And so some of the biggest differences I saw was a shift in when the job ads were coming out. So before, like a lot of the job ads come out in like August, September, October, right? And they're due kind of before Christmas. But then when COVID hit last year, the last job market season, I was just like worried. I was like, oh my gosh, there's like one job to apply to, or whatever. But then I started seeing more jobs being posted later. So far this season, I feel like it's kind of more typical, but maybe some more jobs will pop up as we go here. The other difference was on-campus visits switched to virtual. And so that was different. So I did an on-campus visit in person and then one virtual, and there was a lot of differences in that. Some pros and cons to both, I think. So I don't know if anybody's interested in talking about that, or if other panelists also wanted to jump in on what their experiences were.
Yeah, I can jump off of that. I was on the market. I started I guess the last academic year. Time has just been so strange these past 2 years. I think I was on the market in 2019. Yeah, started in 2019. And then I only was on the market starting, I guess like right before COVID hit. And then actually, is that right? Sorry. Okay, I'm just forgetting. But I started right when, when COVID was affecting the job market, and was just, terrified about what the job prospects would be or lack thereof. My initial strategy was just to go for a mix of tenure track and postdoc positions. And then when COVID first hit, I just knew that I had to take a hard shift towards, really applying to as many positions as I could, but also thinking that postdocs would be more realistic. And in the beginning of the cycle, when jobs usually typically came out around the fall, I've noticed that the number of jobs was just like plummeted. Typical to when the jobs started coming out before, which was around like June or July. But then things started picking up, and I applied to a number of positions, and also had to do all my on-campus interviews virtually. For me, this was sometimes met a 10-hour time difference between the United States and South Africa, so that wasn't so great. But it also meant that there was some precarity with certain positions. So I was slated to start a postdoc also at Harvard, and the postdoc eventually just dissolved because they weren't able to allocate funding during that time. So I just had to, think quickly on my feet and refigure. But I don't think that'll be so much of a problem now. Since that's happened, I feel like a lot of the jobs that were supposed to come out last year or the year before have all been coming out now. So the job market seems like it's, just like great. There's a lot of jobs out. It's really fantastic. And I don't think that's necessarily going to be the same the year after, but fingers crossed. There are also a number of pros and cons, I thought, when it came to doing in-campus interviews virtually. You didn't really, get to obviously have a sense of what the department was like, department culture, speaking to faculty and students, getting that juicy gossip behind doors, but also having these sort of interpersonal interactions with your potential colleagues and peers. And, some people just do better in person. I think at the same time, when it came to giving a job talk or having interviews with people, being behind a screen kind of provided like a layer of protection or a separate, another degree of separation. So when the job talk began, instead of sitting in front of a podium out of, tons of people, I was, on my couch and just giving a talk to a computer. So I think that really helped as well. but happy to talk more about the trade-offs. Hopefully no one will have to deal with that in the future.
Yeah, I can add to that. So I was on the market for 3 years. So I started when I was wrapping up my PhD, and I applied very broadly. This is pre-pandemic, this is a 2017-2018 school year, so it was pre-pandemic, but still you just never know any given year, even when there's not a pandemic, what the market's going to be like, what funding streams look like, what the competition looks like. So it's one thing I would wanted to take as a takeaway point is just there's so many idiosyncrasies that go into these decisions that if things don't work out the way you had hoped, don't take it personally. And I think that was hard for me to learn, but you hear it from a lot of people who've gone through this and have been on search committees. And actually, I've sat on a search committee now. We actually are hiring in here. And so seeing it on the other side, especially so soon after being on the market, there really are a lot of just administrative things that go on behind the scenes that you're not privy to. And so there's just a lot of idiosyncrasies, which I know isn't very reassuring, but also just means like you can't beat yourself up about things sometimes. So hopefully it's a little reassuring. That being said, I applied really broadly. So I was applying, like Andy was saying, I was applying for tenure track, even though I knew I wasn't quite as competitive, just finishing up, not having my PhD in hand quite yet, but then also postdocs. And then even looking outside of academia, I mean, I was leaning towards staying in academia, but I applied for public health positions, still mostly research. And I did get some postdoc interviews there. So that's one of the nice things about being in human biology is we have really translatable skills outside of academia. So if that's something of interest to you, I'd recommend looking broadly if you're worried about opportunities. But I did stay in academia. I got a postdoc position, which helped me to build up my sort of new research project, get some papers out, which helped strengthen my resume for when I was each year when I was back on the market. It was getting better and better. So to take some time, so be persistent to don't give up. Because especially if you do have a postdoc or a research position or teaching position, you can build up skills that you can add to your resume and make yourself more competitive. So when I interviewed for this position that I got, I was interviewing in February 2020, so just before the pandemic, when everything shut down a couple of weeks later. So I did visit on campus, but everyone was talking about the pandemic and speculating about it. So I got lucky that I was able to come out and visit and meet people and go do the in-person things. But I have seen the other side of it, like I just said, being on the other side when we were doing a search last spring, where it was all virtual. So it was odd, both for the candidates, I'm sure, but also as being someone on the search committee, doing virtual interviews, doing virtual dinners. But we're doing 3 searches right now in the department, and mostly cultural anthropology. And we've been talking about this, and it looks like we're moving, depending on how things go, we're moving back to in person. So I imagine that's what a lot of universities will be doing, assuming that there's no huge wave or surge happening. So hopefully when you're applying for jobs, you'll have a chance to be able to visit in person, for better or worse, because there are trade-offs like Andy was saying, but it is nice to be able to actually see the place in person, not just the university, but also the community around where you might be living and buying a house and things like that. So hopefully that'll be an option going forward. But yeah, happy to answer any other questions related to what I just said too.
Yeah, I would just build off of what Theresa said and note that we're kind of predicating this conversation on the assumption that everyone is aiming for a postdoc or tenure track, but there are many avenues to jobs within and outside of academia. And I know, speaking to friends, that industry is hiring like crazy right now. So if that's something you're considering, I don't think that hiring boom is going away anytime soon. And as Andy said, I think it was kind of frustrating for many people in the postdoc because funding sources kind of evaporated or job streams disappeared. But my experience is a little bit different because I kind of designed my own postdoc and federal sources like NSF, SBE, SPRF postdocs, and the F32 streams. Those are congressionally allocated funding sources. So those pots of money don't dry up or get reallocated. So those are they're very competitive, but they're good avenues to consider if you're thinking about a postdoc.
Thank you all so much. Go ahead.
Can I just follow up on that? Yeah, thanks, Kyle, for mentioning non-academic job opportunities. I am like a huge proponent of that, and I would say that like like one of the main things I wanted everyone to kind of go away from this was thinking that, or was just to know that like it's never too late to think about the job market. And that's the strategy that I took really when I first started at Northwestern. And that meant thinking about, trying to present at a conference as soon as possible, start, working on a first author publication, thinking about potential field sites, certain areas of study. I think that we're all doing this, but also thinking about where that sort of productivity is like directed. So whether that is going to an academic job, and all those things of course matter, but also thinking about trying to aim for a non-academic position. And I think that can also happen as early as when you step foot into the department your first day. And what that could look like is thinking about what different industries you're interested in, what your desired skill set is, what skills you want to develop over time. Being in a PhD program offers you like so many great professional development opportunities. It's funny to like talk about it that way, but biostatistics, qualitative data analysis, conducting field research, data science, all these things are like so relevant outside of this world that we're in, which is academia. And then also along the ways, possibly picking up some side gigs, whether it's like unpaid or paid internship, preferably paid, trying to have mentors outside of academia. And a PhD can be really long, so you have a lot of time to think about these things, talk to new people, develop new skills, and eventually that could generate into a really cool job opportunity that could rival any sort of academic position, if not be better for what whatever your needs are. So I think thinking about your future post PhD should start in day one, and you'll always sort of like ruminate and think about what these next positions could be, and being really strategic about designing your PhD so that it fits one or multiple potential post PhD options. And happy to talk a little bit more about like the non-academic job market if that comes up.
Yeah, before we do a question, I would just add to Andy's point about thinking about what you want your post-PhD job to look like. You're not a failure if you leave academia. So embody that mindset early on, I would say, because unfortunately, the process of a PhD, I think, will beat that mindset into you, for better or for worse. So if you can get out of that way of thinking early on, take a job that best suits the life that you want, the needs that you have, your goals and ambitions, and sometimes that may or may not be in the academy.
That's super great advice. I really appreciate that from both Kyle and Andy. And it looks like we have a hand up from Alexandra. Do you have a question?
Yeah, hi. Well, first, thank you for this workshop. I think this is going to be very helpful. So you mentioned a few things, so I have a couple of questions. The first is I started my PhD wanting a job outside of academia. So I was curious to know, so a couple of you have said that you have applied to non-academic jobs, but how that process has been different, especially that I feel like the academic job market lasts a lot longer, right? So you start applying in the fall and then you have the interviews in the spring and then you won't hear back for a couple of weeks. While the non-academic job search is a little more, right? Like the position is open in 2 weeks, like, so it's trying to time these two if you're applying to both, how you might have done that. And then for academic position specifically, if you just applied to any position that you were remotely kind of qualified for, or if you just maybe had specifics that you were looking for, like a location, like if you really wanted to live in California, maybe you just looked at places in California or in Florida or wherever it's warm or things like that, right? Like if you had things that were not directly related to academia that for your personal purposes, where you might want to live close to family, something like that, and how that has shaped your job search.
I had some thoughts if that's okay with the other panelists, but when I was applying for, originally, when I was applying most broadly, I applied for both simultaneously, so I didn't really stack one over the other. I was doing interviews for both simultaneously too. I would say in terms of the process, there's overlap in that, and this is another point I wanted to make, networking is really important. We don't talk about it as much as I think we should in academia. I mean, that's part of how I ended up in my wonderful postdoc, was meeting my postdoc advisor and interacting with her before I applied. So similar to grad school, when you often reach out to your potential advisor and talk to them first. Similarly, that can help you in the job market, whether it's a postdoc or a tenure track, if people know who you are, who've interacted with you. But it's similar in industry. You need to network, and I always talk about that, but I think there's more tools in industry for that, like a LinkedIn and things like that. So I did make a LinkedIn. I did a lot of informational interviews when I was interested in industry. So I was reaching out to people in public health and global health, and just not asking for a job, but asking to, I'm interested in working at this position here, my qualifications, can I talk to you about your experience? Especially if we had a common connection. So I was looking, people who went to schools that I went to, so that we had a common thread. And they were very generous to have like a 20-minute phone call and talk about the application process for them and the company and give me tips. And so that was really helpful, and I think helped me figure out where to apply when I was looking at that. And then in terms of looking within academia at any position, I would say I was personally torn on that, because I really wanted to end up in the Northwest, because I grew up there, I love it there, my family's there, I'm very close to my family. But I think at the end of the day, if you really have your heart set in staying in academia, you have to be willing to make sacrifices. You should look at your priorities, because in academia, even in a really good year where there are tons of jobs, they're probably not going to be every single place all over the country, and you're going to be able to end up exactly where you want to. Not to say it's impossible. I definitely know people who have, and who have transferred jobs to get to family or a position where they, place they want to be. But especially starting out, it's if you want to stay in academia, you usually have to be pretty open in where you end up. So it's a kind of a call you have to make. I mean, in terms of applying for any position, when I was looking broadly, I basically applied for anything that was looking for a human biologist. The good news is a lot of places are looking for human biologists. Global health is huge, human biology, a lot of undergrad interest. So universities tend to be looking for that in a lot of ways. But I got a little, so when I was doing my postdoc, I knew I had 3 years of funding. So my first year when I applied, I really only applied for kind of the dream jobs. Like I would love to work there. So I was more restrictive then. But then the second year, when I knew I was running out of time, I extended my net and applied more broadly. So I think that those are the kind of calls I made. But you really have to think about your priorities and just kind of time out how much time and funding you have to figure out what works best for you.
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts. So the kind of make your own postdoc that you can get through NIH or NSF allows you to kind of choose a mentor, and often cases there are many possible mentors, so you can be kind of somewhat selective in the order that you reach out to those mentors, and maybe location can be a primary factor in ranking that list, but I wouldn't say should be the sole determining factor. The other is, again, a little bit of foresight comes in to play in terms of what you want what kind of non-academic jobs you're applying to. So things in like biotech and that kind of industry are much shorter turnaround times, but I know like the Rand Corporation and other consulting firms, so Rand is big here in LA, there are other sort of Northeastern firms, they tend to hire, their hiring process is much longer and their application review process is much longer. So definitely keep that in mind as you're thinking about what kind of non-academic industry positions you might want to apply for, and do research ahead of time so you know what the process looks like.
Sorry, I agree with that. Yeah, I think the timing is a tricky one, especially because different organizations have different timelines, and like I think in general, the timeline for hiring in academia is like ridiculous, right? Like who takes over a year or like a year or over a year, whatever, to hire an individual. And sometimes that hiring process doesn't even work out, but I think for a lot of industry positions, the timing is quite it's like much shorter. And I think one thing for those who are really serious about looking at the non-academic job market, like calling it industry, I think is also like just completely not helpful. I know it's like a shorthand that we use, but it's like, there's so many different types of industries that we could be that are relevant for our work, whether it's, think tank work, NGO work, working in tech or pharma, whatever. And all these have different sets of expectations and norms. So I think that's important to think about. I think like, especially for people who don't have a lot of quote unquote industry experience and are trying to transition outside of academia, I think a fair number of people are making the transition without having much experience in that particular job. So I know you do some stuff on like energetics, for example, like we could dedicate 6 years to studying doubly labeled water, and it's great. But when we try to apply doubly labeled water to like the Urban Institute and to study, racial segregation, urban policies, it might not necessarily be the most relevant thing. And I think, of course, doing your research, doing informational interviews, all that stuff is really important. But I think a lot of corporations, especially those that cater to individuals who are transitioning from academia into non-academic jobs, provide like internships or these like short, 3-month like full-time hires for you to get experience, for them to suss you out. And I would say more oftentimes than not, if they like you, that turns into full-time employment. I think that's a nice model, especially for those who are sort of unsure about going, diving straight into the deep end and having a sense of like what sort of job you're walking into. And then I think it's also strategic to think about places that have already hired people who've gone through this process. So whether it's individuals who have left academia, or it's companies that know that there are lots of PhDs from academia who are trying to transition into non-academic jobs. And then the thing that I always talk about that Theresa had already mentioned is informal interviewing. And that's like my number one thing. I'll, write that on my forehead. And it's a skill that's so relevant for, I think, for any job, any opportunity you're trying to seek. I think it's like a really valuable life skill. And I think, it can be scary at times, but, we all benefited from information that other people gave us, especially those who are more senior than us. And I think we'd be surprised when we realized, someone who's like a VP for an organization or, high up, who's, possibly scary, will actually give us time, 30 minutes to an hour, to impart information. People love talking about themselves, and you might get a free lunch out of it. So I think that's my spiel for the going through the non-academic job process. The last thing actually I wanted to note with that is that when it comes to networking, I think I was given this advice when I was in college that more often times than not, your best contacts are likely at the edge of your social network. So it's not likely that the people who we want to talk to are like our immediate friends or our parents or like even our friends' parents. We really have to work to try to find people who are, I guess, like most relevant to the opportunities we're trying to seek. So, for example, when I was in college, I was really interested. I went to Emory, and the CDC was right next door, and I was really interested in trying to think about what sort of like social science positions would be available at the CDC. One of my professors connected me with one of his old master's students who worked there. She did something on like mosquitoes. We had a nice conversation. She put me in touch with her old boss, who was a sociologist who went to Emory. And then he put me in contact with a medical anthropologist who ran this really interesting global study on childhood trauma. yeah, and I ended up working in this division for like half a year, and it was like a really wonderful opportunity. And just kind of tracing through these multiple steps and trying to find these people who, again, are at sort of the edge of your social network, I think was something that was, that continues to be really effective for me.
Oh, that was awesome. So much great information. I'm learning a lot myself. So thank you all. So we have a few questions in the chat, and then I see a hand raised as well. So the first question in the chat is for any panelists. In your experience, did you see good opportunities in hirings for BIPOC international applicants? Do you think that the job market is still harder for them? Do you guys have thoughts, experiences to speak on that? It's a great question.
I can go. I think I'm not an international student, but I just based on my experiences with colleagues and friends who've been in the market, and also just knowing how hiring works, especially for permanent positions in the United States, I would say that the job market is considerably more difficult for people who don't have a green card or a US citizen who are trying to get positions in academia. I wouldn't say that's not, that's impossible. In my department recently, I think there were like 2 of the most recent hires were those who didn't have US citizenship. I think when you're at well-funded universities, they're definitely willing to provide the financial and logistical support for that. But unfortunately, I think it also means that people who are coming from abroad have to work a lot harder to try to get these positions. I actually ran a similar discussion for Africanists, and specifically people who are living in Africa or from Africa, who are trying to get jobs in the United States or outside of Africa, Europe, whatever. So I can there's a recording of this I can send to Liz or Mecca, if that's helpful for other people. And we talk a lot about these issues, but this was geared more towards the humanities. But really, I think what we ended up sort of discussing was a number of things. One, it's more typical, I think, in the humanities for people to consider these write-up fellowships. And there are a number of really prestigious write-up fellowships that really position people in the humanities in, effectively when they're on the job market. So looking out for, really just trying to look out for different opportunities, whether it's publishing more, having these like nice write-up fellowships or whatnot that will augment your candidacy, I think, of course, is great. I think, like talking to other people who have gone through that process and seeing, if there are certain universities that are more amenable to people who are coming from, or who are international applicants. Sorry, I'm just reading the question. I'll just send that webinar around. But I think those are some of the main suggestions. I guess the last thing that they mentioned that was related to the second point was just thinking about postdoc programs that have traditionally accepted people who are who don't have, for example, U.S. citizenship. And I think there are a lot of international students who get these, postdoc program, or get these postdocs that regularly accept people who are outside of academia, or who are not like U.S. citizens, for example. That seems to be a really good stepping stone into getting an academic job, whether it's the United States or like a, another great position outside of the U.S.
In terms of,
No, go ahead.
The other part of that question, in terms of opportunities for candidates of color, I don't have experience with international, so I'm glad Andy was able to speak to that. But I will say, I think it's probably, I mean, my sense it might be how it might vary a bit by institution and the current focus of the institutions and their goals for hiring. So for example, here we are doing a push to diversify faculty. And so in the current searches we're doing, we're explicitly seeking out posting opportunities for these positions in, Black and Bioanth and communities like that. So trying to get the word out to underrepresented communities more explicitly. So not to say that that's a perfect fix by any means, but I think that there's at least more attention to trying to foster those opportunities. And when we are looking at the applicants, there's more of an explicit expectation that you will consider the contribution to diversity. Now we ask for diversity statements and things like that. So again, not to say it's perfect, but I think that there's at least more attention being given to that. So that might create new opportunities in the future, especially as new, race cluster hires are being conducted here and things. There's more focus on these issues that could be beneficial.
Yeah, I've been seeing that push as well. Like even some of them straight up in the job calls, but also like within the department I got my PhD from, there was a push there too. And I remember one of the faculty members saying, I'm not even going to support hiring anybody who is white. Like, so I think that there is this push, and I think that's great. Is it going to translate to actually hiring more people of color or international people? I don't know. I hope it does. But really what I hope is that there's also like this push later on for retention, like trying to retain people, right? And actually promoting them and keeping them at the institutions rather than just saying, oh, we're hiring people, but we're not actually keeping them on or making this a good enough or comfortable enough place for them to actually do their work well. So I hope that this push is followed up by a push for retention later on too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for sharing. So we've got lots of questions coming in, which is super exciting. The second question in the chat is, has anyone heard of departments hiring recruiting or headhunting firms to place grad students into industry jobs? And I saw, James, you also had your hand up. So did you want to add to that or have another question, or was that?
Sure. It was more so just a clarification. So because I feel like, we're talking a lot about like how we should be networking with a lot of industry folks, but I think a lot of us don't actually know how to get, non-academic jobs, people working in non-academic jobs. Like that may not, I don't necessarily think that's a lot of graduate students go into and get taught how to do that. And I came from an undergraduate institution that was put a real emphasis on like co-op, and they very much had like a system for placing undergrad students in jobs. And I also, there are people, maybe this is just my own like experiential, my own experiences from going on dates with recruiters, but like there are people who are actually, their job is to place people in jobs, right? And it's usually low cost. And I think, because, and it makes sense if we were to target, like if it's targeted at departmental level, because the department has an investment in having their graduate students employed, because who's going to donate to the department, right? So like, I'm wondering if anybody's ever heard of that, or if there's ever been heard of conversations around that, if that makes sense.
I haven't heard of any like departments or anything having like hiring recruiters. I think that would be a really good idea and a good investment in money, because like if the people that you're giving your PhDs to are getting job placements, that's going to make your program look better, look stronger, be better, make that PhD more valuable to get it from there if you see that you can get a job. So I think that's a good investment, but I've never personally heard of any departments doing that. The only people, like the people that I know who have gotten PhDs that were human biologists, like any recruiting happened on LinkedIn. So they were being contacted constantly on LinkedIn for different kinds of jobs. And that's honestly the only, aside from people like being invited to apply for jobs, which I think is pretty rare, like within academia. But outside, the only thing I've heard of is through LinkedIn and like random recruiters.
Yeah, and I was going to say, none of them looked, I didn't pursue it, but none of them looked as legit, but there's probably variation. But on LinkedIn, I do have a LinkedIn. There's a setting where you can say whether you're actively looking for a job or not. And if you have that setting on, you can just Google to figure out how to do that if you have a LinkedIn, then you will pop up when recruiters are doing searches. If you have whatever, part of it too is how you design your LinkedIn, right? You probably don't want to make it look like a CV. You want to make it look more like a non-academic language, the way it's structured. So you're popping up in some of those searches. So to be a little strategic about it, probably. But if whatever skills you're listing are aligning with their search criteria, you'll pop up in the recruiter search and you will get messages. So that's another thing to think about.
Yeah, I haven't heard of departments hiring placement agencies or anything like that. The only equivalent I can really think of is to really monitor your email for networking opportunities that are organized by graduate student associations, postdoctoral associations, teaching centers on campus if your university has one. So, you know, at the two institutions I've been at for grad school and now postdoc, I'm constantly bombarded with those kinds of emails. So it's never too early to start taking advantage of them, especially if you're very seriously considering kind of non-academic track careers or careers outside of universities. I would also just add that yeah, how do I phrase this? There's a lot more mobility in the non-academic market. So if the first job you take isn't your greatest love, there's a much different culture about changing jobs outside of the academy than there is inside of it. So that's also something to keep in mind.
Excellent. Yeah, I haven't heard of that either, but I do think it's a great idea. And utilizing LinkedIn especially is something I think that we forget about when we're stuck in our PhD program, just trying to finish. And so that's great advice. And I will note also, Chloe put a link in the chat for Imagine PhD, which looks like a resource for finding jobs. I think a career exploration and planning tool for the humanities and social sciences. So definitely check that out. And then we have another question for any panelists on any advice for seeing the bigger picture, marketing yourself during an academic job search while still in the weeds of your dissertation. Especially given the roller coaster of adjusting dissertation, losing networking opportunities, etc., due to COVID. So in other words, how to best market yourself from your couch. And also I'll add to that my own question of how do you sell yourself to other departments that may not be anthropology or other disciplines or other non-academic job platforms? How do you sell your anthropological skills when you're not applying for an anthropological position?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this. I think this is a really good question, and I think this is something that a lot of ABD folks struggle with, especially because we're bombarded with all these things that we should do, and we also are bombarded with the precarity of the academic job market. When I've had these conversations with my friends and I've heard other people talk about it, I think the thing that consistently comes up is just being really clear about what your priorities are. I think it's really easy for us to sort of have a really wide scan and like cast a really wide net and do like all these things. But I think without having like a specific focus or plan, it's you're just really going to burn yourself out by trying to just sort of take like a blind shotgun approach rather than being more targeted. So what this looked like, I think, at least what I've seen other people do, I think it really just depends on like how far along you are, how much you want to be in academia, and how much you're willing to settle or not when it comes to being in an anthropology department or being outside of an anthropology department, assuming that you want to be in the anthropology department. Let's just use that as an example. I think like setting, for example, like setting specific criteria could be helpful. So saying that, okay, maybe I only want to be in the East Coast. I only want to be in an anthropology position. This is my first year on the job market, and I might have 2 or 3 more years that I'm on the market. So maybe this first year, when my chances are somewhat low, I'm still, early in my dissertation writing or midway there, then I'm only going to focus my time on these jobs that are like dream positions or those that I think I'm most competitive for. And then I think, yeah, and then maybe as you move along, trying to widen your criteria or specify your criteria. But I think this practice of trying to think about what your priorities are is really helpful for any sort of decision-making process that could really lead to endless searching or endless thinking. So that's one thing. I think when it comes to also balancing dissertation writing with being on the job market, you just really have to write. You just have to like write your dissertation. You just have to get as much of it done as you can. I know that's like easier said than done, but you don't want to be in a position where you have a job and you have to delay that job because you don't have your dissertation in hand, or worse, you're not. I mean, I don't think people will. Hopefully people don't like fail you if you're that far along, but you have like really intense edits that you have to go through because you've been spending so much time away from your dissertation and being on the job market. And a lot of the time the job market isn't that fruitful, right? And then I think the last thing that I want to mention that's somewhat related to this, but I think is also relevant to a lot of other questions that have come up. And I think, Theresa, you had spoken about this already, was just about public health and like the relevance of public health positions for anthropologists, especially human biologists. I found that, I mean, this is my perspective. I don't know if everyone shares this, but I don't really see biological anthropologists and biological anthropology departments looking down on people who have gone into public health and come back. If anything, they're so similar that I don't think that's really a thing. And the number of positions in public health are just like, so yeah, there's so many more jobs in public health than there are in anthropology. And the training, I would say, it's also probably a lot better. So looking at a variety of different public health programs, there are these great T32 NIH training programs that offer like, I think up to 3 years of just salary funding and some extra benefits. And you get placed in a network of people and have advisors, and it's pretty independent, as independent as you want it to be. And then other program postdoc opportunities just float around. Yeah, that I just think that this isn't exactly what you're speaking to, Melissa, but I think being aware of fields or areas that also just offer a large number of positions will also sort of address this concern. The last thing I'll say about this is going back to networking. I think it's common for people to have postdoc positions with people that they've been working with throughout their PhD or maybe even before. So maybe you have a committee member who's in a different department who could offer you a postdoc position, or a colleague of someone people who are hiring for postdocs usually have the ability just to choose anyone they want to accept. Yeah, and I think that usually comes as a result of knowing someone and building a relationship, and then knowing that you do good work.
Yeah, I would just add to the kind of postdoc suggestions in that one, Wennergren has funding for postdocs that involve analysis of data that's already collected. So, if your dissertation wasn't exactly what you wanted it to be, you might be able to cobble together a postdoc that way to flesh out your dissertation, or you could use it as the basis of like an F32 or SPRF application. And just to Andy's point about talking to people in your network about postdocs, do that early. And if you're thinking about applying for a postdoc grant, do that early so that you can really flesh out the project. And an F-32 is, and an SPRF, it's a lot of work. I think it took me basically an entire summer to write mine. And often it takes longer than that. So yeah, do so early. And I think just to the point about networking, a lot of people have data that they'll never get around to analyzing. So I think as we kind of crawl out of our pandemic holes, a lot more people are open to collaboration, and that can happen over email. So it's never a bad idea to reach out to anyone that you're interested in collaborating with. Unfortunately, this I think was really hard kind of earlier in the pandemic, and Carly, who is here, Carly and I reached out to some people and kind of, I guess it was last summer, and people were in the very initial fear phase of, we don't know what research is going to look like after this. I have to invest and care more about my students and my postdocs. And but I think that has changed as we've kind of inched our way through and out of the pandemic. So and I think anthropologists in general, my observation is that anthropologists in general are much more open to that than collaborating across fields, but perhaps other people have different experiences.
I know we don't have like that much time left, but just a few, like, because I think part of that question was like, how do I network or market myself from the couch? So just a few things, like some of the things you're already doing, right? Go to conferences, they're online, whatever, that's fine. Still go to them, present at them. If you're not presenting, ask questions. So that's how people like know who you are, is if you're listening to a talk, ask a question after the talk. Sometimes it feels scary to ask a question, but be part of the conversation and people will remember you for that. So that's one thing. Go to conferences, do the conference thing, even if it's online. Another thing is be on Twitter. So post about your own research. If you have a paper coming out, even if it's not your whole dissertation, whatever, if you publish some short report or something, tweet it out there. People will like retweet it. I've had people write blogs about my articles that I posted. I never even heard of these people and they're tweeting stuff. So just be on Twitter, tweet that stuff, and then retweet other people. So if you want people to kind of remember your name, start to get familiar with your name, one way to do that is retweeting their articles and say, hey, this awesome paper just came out by so-and-so. They're going to remember that you did that. Like, I mean, maybe not if it's just one time and they're super famous and, 1,000 people tweeted, but the more they kind of see you on Twitter, like the more you're going to be familiar. Other things too is the HBA does that podcast. So I think the first time I ever was on that podcast was because Chris Lynn saw me present a poster at the HBAs and he was like, hey, you wanted to be on the podcast? So, I mean, that's another way. I mean, I was on the couch when I recorded that first one. So, I mean, that's another way to do that. So, and then just the last thing is you guys are all here right now. The HBA has those student happy hours. Talk to the people who are also students at the same time as you, right? Network with everybody that's here already during like the happy hours and stuff, because these are the people that are going to be, if they're 1 or 2 years ahead of you, they're going to be in positions where you might be applying to jobs later on. So having more people spread out at different institutions who might recognize your name, the better it is for you, right? So go to these happy hours and even talk to the students, get to know the students, because our student status ends at some point, right? So that would be my advice on how to network from your couch.
And we have the 2 student reps here. So if there are events that you want to see, badger them. And I guess one suggestion I have off the cuff is those happy hours are really great, but maybe do something like this, but informal, like the happy hour context, where you just invite postdocs or faculty to some of them and give students an opportunity to ask a question. I saw a note, I guess it was from Liz, about T32s, NRSAs, SPRFs. I'm happy to talk about those now, or you can email me and we can set up a meeting.
I just saw a collection of questions. Thank you, Kyle, and to all our panelists. I saw a collection of questions about financially supporting yourself if going on the job market is unsuccessful. And I understand that that is often a case-by-case basis, but I wondered if that's something our panel could speak to.
I think Kyle killed the game with the F-32. It's like really hard to get. So I would say like postdocs are probably like just like generally applying to postdocs like T32s or these other like postdoc calls, or knowing someone who has postdoc money who could support you. Like I think that's like probably one of the most strategic and like easiest ways to get post PhD funding. And then yeah, I mean Kyle can speak more about the F-32, but from what I know about it, it's a super long application. It's very extremely competitive, and the ratio between the amount of time you put into this application and actually getting it is not so great. So Kyle, tell us how you.
Yeah, it can be very high risk, low return, but it is nice in that it allows you to design a project that's kind of exactly what you want to do. It is a fellowship, so it is not research funding. I think there is some research funding, but in most cases, I think it goes to paying your health and like your health benefits and et cetera, et cetera. So you don't really see any of that money. So they are designed to be projects that are possible within an existing PI's project or your mentor's project. And the secret to those, one of the big secrets that I think maybe anthropologists haven't really figured out is that it kind of takes NIH money to get NIH money. So if you're applying for an F-32 or an F-31, you should be really doing so under the umbrella of someone and the umbrella of a project that is funded by NIH. So you are less likely, unfortunately, to be successful if you just pitch your own project, even if the funding is, if the umbrella project is funded by NSF. And I think kind of vice versa for NSF, but perhaps it's a little less. I didn't get the SPRF, so I can't speak to that, but perhaps it's a little less strict for NSF. Sam Erlocker is really nice. He's the only person that I know in Anthro that has got an SPRF. So you can reach out to him if you're interested in that particular funding stream. But yeah, I think postdocs can be challenging in any avenue. But I think another big secret to getting postdoc grants is to apply for grants while you're in graduate school. So you should really be applying for Wenner-Gren, the NSF, DDIG. There's other options as well for international research. So often having any record of success with grant funding will help you secure postdoc grants.
Then just to add to the question more broadly beyond postdoc funding, because as we were just mentioning, it can be really competitive. So just trying to, when I was on the market and realizing that it might not pan out as I had hoped, I was trying to kind of plan out, worst case scenarios and try to arrange other options if, the postdocs, the tenure track, any of the non-academic positions I was looking at, none of that worked out. So I also reached out to faculty members I had met, going back to what I said earlier, maybe I'm more on the fringes of my network, like friends of friends or loosely associated with my advisor. So there was some connection, but I didn't know them very well, especially if they were in places I was interested. So I mentioned I was interested in the Northwest. So, I reached out to people like in the Northwest who I had loose connections with just to ask about lecturing opportunities, even though that wasn't necessarily my first choice. And so actually that did work out where I was I went and I spoke at a colloquium, and after I reached out, like, hey, we're having a colloquium, we need speakers, you want to come be a colloquium speaker? So I got to go and give my job talk, which was really good practice, even though they weren't hiring, but it was good practice. I got to meet people and network in a university where I would have loved to work. And at the end of that, they said, well, if nothing works out, let us know. And maybe I'm pretty sure we could arrange a lecturing position. It didn't come to that, but that was really comforting to have in the back of my head. So that goes back to that networking, and just, at the very least, I would have gotten an opportunity to practice my job doc. So that's another way to think about lining up opportunities if the job market doesn't work out for you initially.
That's great. Thank you all so much. We are over time, and I don't want to keep the panelists much longer than they agreed. So I think that what we'll do is we will send the recording to everyone who registered, and also if the panelists don't mind maybe putting in their email addresses in the chat, just in case people have follow-up questions that weren't answered, that would be amazing. Obviously you don't have to, but if you're willing to answer more questions, that would be great. And we will send the Zoom recording with the links from the chat as well for those resources. But I just want to say thank you all again so much for coming. Thank you to the panelists so much for sharing your experiences. It was extremely helpful for me. I'm not on the job market yet, but I will be soon. So I took notes, and thank you so much. And yeah, and come to our happy hours if you guys haven't been. We talk about this stuff all the time.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining. Thank you, panelists. This was wonderful. We love y'all.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh, people leave so fast. That was great, Mecca. Thank you.
Yeah, it went so fast. Like, I feel like there were so many questions that didn't get answered, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So I think we can stop recording.
Sounds good.